The anime begins in a quiet forest with a single house right in the center. In this scene, we are introduced to our protagonist, Ryo Mihara, who rises from his bed to observe some of the things around him. After going outside to look at the forest, the first thing he does is recite a small incantation, making a pool of water appear over his hand. Then, in a scene change, we see what happened just moments before he arrived there. Ryo suddenly regains consciousness, only to realize he's in an unfamiliar place. A man then emerges from the mist and tells him clearly that this is not the afterlife. Once they can see each other clearly, the man asks if his name is Ryo Mihara, and he confirms that it is. Hearing this, the man seems relieved and tells him it's been a long time since he's had any visitors. Getting straight to the point, he announces that Ryo had died in an accident. Without showing any surprise, Ryo says that he remembers, and it's possible to see that a vehicle had run over him. Then he asks the man if he is God, but the latter replies that he is not, and that he can consider him more like an angel who is willing to respond to his inquiries. And so, Ryo decides to refer to this man as Michael. He then informs Michael that he is aware of his impending reincarnation and wishes to know what steps he should take now that he's being granted a new life. Michael tells him to live his life however he wants, that no one has told him to do anything specific, and he won't be given any special mission. This leaves Ryo deep in thought. After a few moments, he articulates his desire for a tranquil, serene existence, much like that of a devoted Full Metal Alchemist fan. Given his answer, Michael tells him he's going to reincarnate in a magic world, which they call FI. In FI, 1 in 5 people can use magic, and the attribute he'll have in this world is water magic. As he desires a peaceful existence, he will reincarnate in Rondo Forest, where a dwelling and provisions for 2 months will be ready for his arrival. Here we see Ryo taking a look at the warehouse where the food is kept. It's all frozen, leading him to believe that its state is maintained through magic. Michael also informs him that no monsters will be able to approach his home, thanks to a barrier that surrounds it, and for him to receive all these comforts, the crash he experienced must have been truly severe. Ryo then consults the monster encyclopedia within the house. It's clear that despite not recognizing the script, he can both read and comprehend it. Furthermore, he possesses a plant encyclopedia. Back in the present, Ryo starts his first magic experiment. As he does, he discovers that as long as he visualizes the magic he wants, he doesn't need to say anything. This leaves him feeling a little disappointed since he enjoys shouting out his powers verbally. Anyway, he sees that he can only summon cold water, which means he can't use the bathtub in his house for a nice hot bath. Left with no alternative, he takes a log, attempting to start a fire. However, after struggling with sticks for some time, he eventually gives up, fully grasping the true difficulty of such a task. Putting that aside, he focuses on trying to freeze the water in a bucket, but he isn't getting any results. Since he really wants to make some ice, he tries even harder, as he's very interested in using a spell that would allow him to create ice. What he does next is condense the water and remove the heat, while also visualizing the H2O molecules. He then joins the oxygen element with the hydrogen element of the molecule next to it, which allows him to create ice. This brings him great joy, and he expresses gratitude to the hydrogen bonds. After successfully creating ice, Ryo sets his sights on making fire. He ingeniously crafts a magnifying glass-like tool, leveraging it to concentrate the sun's rays precisely onto the tinder, thus igniting a flame. At night, he can finally enjoy a truly nice warm bath and acknowledge that he has made significant progress for his very first day. He then considers that he should be able to create hot water, just as he did with ice, leading him to conclude that magic is incredibly useful, and he apparently has much to accomplish starting tomorrow. Upon waking up, he consumes some meat and recalls that Michael had left him provisions for 2 months, implying that he will need to hunt for additional food once the current supply is depleted. And since the forest is outside the barrier, he assumes there must be monsters out there, but he knows he can't go out with just a knife. He needs attack magic. The same can be said for Carolina at night. Without wasting any time, he goes out to start practicing his magic, the water ball, and is excited that his first attack spell has been a resounding success, though he notices it lacks considerable power. Despite this, he switches out the water ball for the water jet, fully intending to visualize a slender, high-speed stream of water that shoots out at maximum velocity. However, all he creates is a small jet of water that rapidly loses its power and barely travels any distance, leaving him to confront the disappointment of his failed attempt. There he remembers a question he asked Michael, which was, "How can magic be used?" The angel replies that the essence of magic is visualizing something, so he must visualize an image and gain experience. From here, Ryo dedicates himself to performing the water jet over and over again, and after a few hours, he observes how his attack is taking shape. When he returns home, he discovers that by reversing the process of creating ice, he's able to create hot water, although he can't avoid getting burned when he gets in. The next day he decides to ice directly into the air. He realizes that the process is quite slow, yet he is indeed able to execute it. Without further ado, he decides to name this attack the Cycle Lance, but when he tries to launch it, it collapses just a meter away. He is aware that with these disadvantages, it is not viable to use it in a real fight, and for that reason, he decides to train more. Gradually, he performs several magic spells, one after another, consistently maintaining this rhythm until the arrival of dusk. At that point, fatigue suddenly hits him, making him fall to his knees. He also feels on the verge of fainting, leading him to believe he's completely depleted his mana. That night, he realizes something important. He has to light a fire during the day, since his only method uses sunlight. In other words, he's gone without dinner because he can't cook it. The next day, he practices his magic again and continues for the days that follow. After a brief period, he begins to see the fruit of his efforts. He is now able to instantly create the Cycle Lance, though it still doesn't travel very far. Even so, he believes it's time to venture outside the barrier, and that's exactly what he does, holding a spear he created himself. As he moves forward, he reaches the river and finds something he'd been hoping to see: quartz. He can use it as flint to light a fire, even when there is no sun. With that essential resource in hand, he sets out to find some antidote herb, as he would consider his adventure a success if he obtains it. At that very moment he turns around to look, and there's a monster cutting him down. It's a laser boar. In such a situation, his body tenses up as this is not good at all. He even freezes in fear when the monster charges toward him, preparing to attack. As he faces the imminent impact, images flash through his mind, instantly sparking a reaction. So he quickly gets out of its way by making a nimble jump. When the laser boar attacks again, he remembers he can use magic. As a countermeasure, he creates a path of ice, causing the monster to slide toward him. For the final blow, he forms a cluster of ice spears in front of him like a shield of stakes, which the monster crashes into, dying instantly. That night, he returns to his cabin to read the monster encyclopedia and discovers the laser boar is the weakest rank. He also notes that although it's a basic encyclopedia, the last 2 pages are special. It turns out there's information regarding dragons, beings that are capable of destroying an entire city without any effort whatsoever. And as advice, it says that if you spot one, you must flee immediately, though it's highly probable you can't even do that. It also delves into imps, which are not considered fallen angels, but their origins remain completely unknown. And in the notes, it says to pray you never run into one. Ryo questions the usefulness of that knowledge, then realizes anything is possible in this world. After that, he ventures out again to gather fruit and enjoys one for its perfect balance of acidity and sweetness. Suddenly, he's attacked by a flying monster. After dodging its attack, it launches a wind slash that luckily misses him. He believes the level has suddenly increased, and while fleeing, he deploys ice shields to ward off its attacks. He identifies this creature as an assassin hawk, which employs wind slash and an invisible wind spell, and additionally, after charging, it strikes with its beak and formidable claws. Since he can't escape this beast, he prepares to fight. He stops running and starts shooting several water jets in its direction. The hawk evades the attack by deftly maneuvering in the air, then swiftly charges, rapidly increasing its speed. But Ryo creates a block of ice in the air which it crashes into. After the impact, the hawk collapses to the ground several meters away. But despite Ryo getting closer to being prepared, the monster quickly recovers itself and immediately rises into the air. Ryo then realizes the hawk has an injured eye, and after just a few seconds, it turns around to simply fly away. Now with the danger finally gone, Ryo collapses on the ground for a well-deserved rest, accepting how hard it is to live a peaceful life here. Because he had been escaping from the hawk for quite a distance, he eventually lost his bearings regarding the cabin's whereabouts. As he continued his advance, he believed he was nearing his destination, but instead, he discovered something shiny, where he encountered a headless man in armor, accompanied by a headless horse. The next day, Ryo continued exploring the forest, and seizing the opportunity, he defeated the beast that had threatened his life, successfully employing the easy hit cleave. And this time, our protagonist, Ryo, was able to find his house, so he consistently maintained this activity to be able to gather much-needed resources and food. This all while not neglecting his magic practice in order to strengthen himself in that aspect. On one of those days he discovered a beach, so he didn't hesitate to dive into the sea. But when he did, he was ambushed by a giant monster from the depths, which made him run away in a terrified hurry. Later on, he developed a spell he named Abrasive Jet, which functions as an incredibly focused stream of water, and he utilized it to precisely cut a rock. After that, he discovers that if he hardens ice with magic, he can use it as a garnet abrasive. It's then he starts to notice he's getting really good at using magic. One night, Ryo decides to go back and find the Dullahan he left behind, now armed with an ice sword. He knows the Dullahan is an encyclopedia of monsters, but he's not sure if it's because it's not a monster or just far more advanced. Either way, he's not going to worry about it. Besides, he can learn on his own. Without wasting time, he makes the first move, attacking head-on, but the Dullahan blocks every single blow he throws. During one of his counterattacks, Ryo shields himself by creating an ice shield, but the impact still affects him somewhat. In the Dullahan's next attack, Ryo evades it, intending to strike back, but then he realizes he's missed his chance. This gives the Dullahan an opening to strike his side, and even though Ryo protects himself, the impact is strong enough to knock him down. At this point, Ryo accepts he can't defeat this enemy, but since he didn't die, he figures it's worth coming back every night. He also gets the feeling the Dullahan is trying to tell him that it will train him. At that very moment, the Dullahan, out of its weapon, crafts a water sword, which it then precisely transforms into ice. It then approaches Ryo to give it to him, but its weapon returns to normal. Ryo assumes it wants him to learn how to use it. When he takes the weapon, the Dullahan simply returns to the water and leaves. Later, while exploring the forest, Ryo finds a flying monster. For a moment he thinks it's the same hack because of the scar on its eye, but then he's not so sure because it looks different. Looking closer, he assumes it must have evolved a little. A few seconds later, the monster launches a long-range attack. So we confirm it was the prior one. Ryo quickly uses a 5-layer ice wall, but as soon as he notices his barrier was shattered by that simple attack, he doesn't hesitate to run in different directions to make it hard for the monster to hit him with its projectiles' aims. He keeps repeating this pattern, even launching counterattacks with his ice spears, but Hack effortlessly evades them all without any trouble. It's then that the monster uses some kind of spell that instantly eliminates his size wall, which makes Ryo think it can neutralize magic. But then he sees it stop in midair and braces himself, expecting it to do something. But right after, a lightning bolt strikes down on him. He manages to dodge by jumping aside, but unfortunately, he's separated from his spear. Hack dives toward Ryo, claws extended to strike. Ryo reacts, drawing his sword, just managing to conjure an ice blade, which he uses to firmly block the attack with barely a moment to spare for rest. Hack keeps attacking him again and again, but Ryo is able to block its claws and projectiles with just that one sword. There comes a point where the monster puts a great distance between them to build up speed for an attack. But by preparing and concentrating, Ryo is able to stab the sword into its body just as it gets close enough. When Hack is knocked down, Ryo grasps the grudge as he was the one who blinded him. Then he tells it that he managed to improve a lot thanks to their encounter, since he figured it would attack again and wanted to get stronger for it. He also understands that it evolved just to get even, so, out of respect for its pride, he decides to give it the finishing blow by removing the sword from its wound, and that was enough. And here you can see a dragon flying through that same forest. As Ryo calmly returns home, he's shocked when this powerful being lands right in front of him. To surprise him even more, the dragon speaks, telling him it wasn't sure if it could still use telepathy after so much time without it. Following that, it asks him if he's seen a bird that evolved from an assassin hawk. Ryo replies that he has, and apologizes if it was a vassal of his, since he just killed it. But the dragon only congratulates him on his achievement and points out that the thing he has on his waist is quite unusual. Once Ryo shows it to him, the dragon tells him that it's the sword of the Fairy King, so if he was given it, it's because he is truly liked. Ryo asks a few questions, then the dragon tells him it must leave. Before that, he reveals his name is Lewin, and Ryo introduces himself. In a change of scene, our friend, the angel Michael, notices Ryo has a hidden attribute. But of course, this is something he truly did not expect to happen, since he had not seen one, not since his first reincarnation, a woman, and 10,000 years have passed since then. It is at this point that he reveals Ryo's secret attribute to be that of eternal youth. And that's it for Chapter 1. If you liked it, comment for Part 2 so I know you want it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and below you'll find other videos you can watch.
On a brand new day, Ryo visits a nearby coast, where he comes across some truly interesting sights. He mentions that he only came because he wanted to eat grilled seafood, so he certainly wasn't expecting to encounter a shipwreck. After that, he confirms that the bodies lying on the ground are utterly lifeless, but he is quite relieved to hear that miraculously, one of them is still breathing. Then, in a quick scene change, we briefly witness a giant monster attacking the aforementioned ship, which directly led to their unfortunate end. Once the boy Ryo saved awakens, he finds his belongings right beside him, letting out a deep sigh of relief for having made it through. Then he gets up to go outside and take a look, and moments later, Ryo comes over, expressing his gladness that he's still alive. The boy, on the other hand, is surprised he didn't notice his presence and also finds his way of dressing strange. He quickly realizes that can't be his first question, so he introduces himself as Abel, then expresses profound gratitude for saving his life. Ryo clarifies that he doesn't have to, as he only brought him to his home, though he regrets to inform him that he was the only survivor. Abel speculates that the others were swept away by the current, but he urges Ryo not to worry, as they were merely smugglers and criminals after all. Before going into detail, his stomach starts to rumble from hunger, which makes Ryo invite him to eat, but not before introducing himself as well. Once inside, he tells him he has no other clothes, since he can't make more without thread and fabric. Abel attempts to suggest he could acquire more, yet he falls silent, grasping it's natural not to afford items without funds, and starts to fret he may have offended the man who rescued him. What Ryo does is explain that nobody lives in this area and there are no towns nearby. Upon hearing this, Abel assumes he hunts to survive and lets him know that his food is delicious. At that moment, Ryo uses his magic to fill a jug with water, and showing him this, he informs him that he is a water mage. This catches Abel's attention. He remarks that in the central provinces, hardly half can use it, and he himself cannot. Ryo gets a bit worked up hearing that, as he clearly remembers Michael saying it was only 20%. After that, Abel says he wants to check something and asks to go to the coast. On the way, he asks if he doesn't need a staff since he's a mage, but Ryo replies that he doesn't have anything like that. This makes Abel feel he's offended him again, as it's normal not to have one, being so poor. With this in mind, he tells him if any problems arise, he can handle them. Ryo tries to tell him it's not necessary, but Abel insists it's the least he can do, pointing out that if he's always being saved by him, his reputation would go down the drain. Faced with this, Ryo agrees without further complaint. They soon arrive at the coast, where he notices the corpses are gone, so he figures they were either eaten or washed away by the sea. Abel takes this to mean that had he not been rescued promptly, he would have suffered the very same grim fate. Ryo tells him he's very lucky, but Abel asks him not to be so formal with him, as it doesn't feel right for his savior to speak to him that way, and he'd rather be called by his name, just like his friends do. Hearing that last part, Ryo is left thinking without saying a word, while Abel finishes his search and tells him he can't find what he was looking for. Ryo asks what he'll do now, to which he replies that he'll try to reunite with his companions and could go to the town of Loon, but he thinks that place is too far south. In response, Ryo says he doesn't know where Loon is, but he does think he needs to travel far to the north. With that in mind, Abel suddenly asks Ryo if he'd like to join him, stating he can consider it employment, as his help is truly essential. He then admits he has no idea of their current location or how he could ever reach Loon, so having a guide would prove incredibly helpful. And more than a guide, he means someone he can talk to so he doesn't go crazy. After just a few seconds, Ryo makes his decision and accepts the request, but he warns Abel that he'll need to get ready, and that they'll start their journey tomorrow, which Abel joyfully accepts. As night falls, Ryo tells him he has to say goodbye, as he can only talk to him now, and wants him to know he'll be gone for a while. Abel accepts this without issue, yet he also recalls Ryo previously stating that no one resided in this area. So, instead of just asking, he assumes Ryo wants to pay respects to a loved one, since he couldn't have always been alone, but he can't do more than that, as he doesn't have the right to ask. After a while, Ryo arrives before the Fairy King and tells him that he has to leave the Rondo Forest for a while. Following that, he sincerely thanks him for everything. He survived because of his help, and he truly appreciates it from the bottom of his heart. Finally, he tells him that today will be the last duel they'll have, so he'll fight with more spirit than ever. The Fairy King remains silent and gets into a fighting stance, and then the two begin their combat. Ryo is utterly exhausted when the fight concludes. Yet the Fairy King proceeds to the lake, where he turns to conjure a special gift for him, a fine garment. Ryo is genuinely impressed upon seeing it and expresses his gratitude, proudly accepting the garment. With that farewell concluded, the next day Rio dons his new attire to finally embark on his journey with Abel, though he first casts a glance back at his house as if bidding it farewell as well. After a short walk, the two stumble upon a low-level monster, identical to the one Rio encountered when he first began his explorations. Abel says he'll handle it, and as the monster charges, he blurs out of focus. Impaling, a technique that allows him to fully penetrate the monster with a powerful thrust, making a hole at the point of impact. Seeing Rio's surprise, Abel explains that these are techniques used by swordsmen and others who carry weapons. As night descends, the two light a campfire to rest, and upon resuming their journey, they ultimately stumble upon an area infested with lizardmen. Abel explains that they're really tough rivals in the marshes, and taking a detour is best to avoid confronting them. Despite their actions, Rio warns him that numerous lizardmen are pursuing them, so he'll have to use his magic to fight. Abel tries to warn him it's not a good idea since he doesn't have a staff, but he's utterly stunned when Rio effortlessly uses his icicle lance to dispatch 4 of the creatures with remarkable ease. After defeating them, Abel asks him what that spell he used was. Rio doesn't think it's anything strange and tells him it's Icicle Lance, a water spell. However, Abel points out that Rio used 4 of these spells simultaneously, as a spell is typically supposed to have a single effect. At least, that's what the wind mage he knows always tells him. Rio suggests that perhaps wind magic operates differently, and that for water magic something of this nature should be quite ordinary. Abel still finds it odd but drops it, wanting to move on. That's when Rio creates some water glasses so they can hydrate, saying simple words in the process to make the glass appear and then the water. Abel mentions something that catches his attention. The last time he used water magic, he said, "Water, be born," which he notes he didn't do this time. This makes Rio uneasy, so he simply says he must have imagined it, steering clear of the subject for some unknown reason. Continuing their journey, Abel hands him a coin, and Rio stares at it in surprise, admitting he's never seen money before. This information catches Abel off guard, and he proceeds to inform Rio that the particular coin he's holding is a bronze florin, which originates from the kingdom of Knightly. In addition, he clarifies that while the central provinces mint their own coins, they all share the same denomination and name. Knightly, recognized as one of the central provinces, is also counted among the 3 major nations. The other 2 are the Debuhi Empire and the Handali Federation. Rio finds the name Knightly to be quite impressive. Yet upon hearing Debuhi, he considers it quite uninspired, especially for something as significant as a nation should be. Abel finds it odd that he's talking about it, but changes the subject when he points out they are now in a more open area. Thanks to his reflexes, he destroys a stone heading in his direction with his weapon just in time, while Rio creates a nice shield to protect himself from these attacks. In a matter of seconds, they're surrounded, so Abel tells him they're in trouble, as it's a golem nest. But Rio, however, is merely intrigued by this new enemy, as he had anticipated them to be more humanoid, possessing both arms and legs. Seeing him focused, Abel tells him he'll try to take out the closest one and that he can stay here. He quickly attacks the golem using his impaling technique, but when a hole opens in its body, it regenerates at high speed. Seeing this, Abel returns to Rio, informing him of its regeneration. Rio tells him he wants to try an attack, and after getting his permission, he uses the ice wall times 10, creating a giant ice block that crushes 2 of the golems. Abel asks him what he just did, completely shocked by his action, while Rio positively remarks that he has already taken down 2 of their enemies and will use the same spell on the others. After defeating them, Abel watches the last golem, not understanding why it won't move. Rio thinks the golem absorbs energy from the ground, and being overturned, it can't move. That's when he notices something next to it, and Abel identifies it as a magic stone. It's enormous and has a very vivid color, which makes him believe this golem has defeated countless monsters. Rio considers this a reward from the battle, and extracting anything similar from the others proves complicated, seeing as they were utterly flattened by his attacks. Later on, the 2 of them spot an enormous monster in the distance, which Rio thinks is a giant hippopotamus. Abel tells him he's never seen one in person, but he assumes it's a behemoth. Rio then asks Abel if he intends to fight it. Abel replies, unless he wants to end up as a skewer, he'd rather not. Moments later, the 2 observe flying monsters approaching the behemoth. These creatures are wyverns. They both just watch the imminent battle between monsters. Rio thinks the behemoth will win, while Abel thinks the opposite, seeing it at a disadvantage. Meanwhile, the behemoth awakens as it senses the presence of the wyverns, who then start ceaselessly firing projectiles at it. Reacting to this surprise attack, the behemoth unleashes a powerful wave with its roar, which hits them and makes them plummet to the ground. Since Abel doesn't understand what just happened, Ryo tells him it might have nullified their magic. As night falls, they set up a small camp again, where Abel mentions that dungeons have traps with that magic nullification effect. Before he can continue, Ryo gets really excited when he hears the word dungeon and tells him he'd love to go into one. Noticing his interest, Abel tells him that the only dungeon in the central provinces is in Lune, which is exactly where they're heading. So Ryo asks him why he kept that information to himself, but Abel clarifies that wasn't his intention, since he didn't know he was so interested in dungeons. If there isn't something else he's decided to hide from him. Because of this, Abel asks if he already knows about elves and dwarves, and in response, Ryo just tells him to share everything he knows unless he wants to keep walking. He didn't actually say that, but it is a valid hypothetical reaction. Abel gets the picture, so he explains that dwarves are great warriors and skilled fighters, and there are a few of them in Lune. As for elves, there's only one in Lune, since most of them live in the forests and stay away from them. After hearing this, Ryo mentions that it's just as he expected, but Abel asks him what he's basing that on. Continuing their journey, Ryo mentions that just beyond the mountains ahead of them, they'll be close to human territory. This makes Abel question where Ryo got his intel, and Ryo then recalls his conversation with Lewin. It turns out the dragon told him that this land is surrounded by the sea to the east, west, and south, and to the north there's a mountain range separating it from the other continent. And that's why it's rare to see humans come south from their territory in the north. Now returning to the present conversation for obvious reasons, Ryo tells Abel it's better he remains ignorant of such things, and to simply consider that he possesses a source of knowledge that far surpasses any human understanding. A little later, the two are suddenly ambushed by a truly imposing flying beast. Its gaze is so fearsome that Abel can't help but tremble with absolute terror. Staying calm, Ryo gives the signal, and they both end up throwing pieces of raw meat into the sky. The monster snatches the food and quickly flies off, letting the two finally breathe normally once more. Back on the road, Abel says he's still shaking from what happened, and Ryo feels the same way, as he really didn't think they would have survived if they had fought. Abel mentions that humans can't handle monsters like that and that it's been centuries since anyone saw a behemoth or a griffin, which makes him think this place is either very strange or straight up cursed. And thinking about it, he assumes these mountains are what stop such creatures from reaching human territory. This makes Ryo curious about something, as he believes the wyverns that fought the behemoth came from the north. A few minutes later, they confirm their suspicions when they spot a pair of them in the distance. Abel tells him they don't stand a chance because it usually takes 20 experienced adventurers to face them. Despite this, Ryo thinks they have no other choice because of the route they have to take and suggests the best option is to stop the wyverns from flying. Disregarding Abel's words, he proceeds to step out, firing the icicle lance 4 times, impaling the monster's wings. Abel finishes them off, and they do the same with other wyverns arriving from the skies. Once they're done, Abel mentions it was much easier than he expected, and even though more of them arrive, he's actually eager to defeat them. This catches Ryo's attention, since moments ago he didn't want to fight them, but Abel tells him to shut up and justifies his desire to fight by seeing it as a necessity. After a while, the two of them finally get an excellent view of the other side of the mountains, and looking at the landscape, they can't help but smile with joy. And that's it for Chapter 2. If you liked it, comment Part 2 to show your interest. Subscribe and watch.